Good morning, I'm Claire Murphy. Welcome to the Solo Bureau. Kylie sent me a DM recently asking me to look into something that I think we all maybe don't quite know enough about: political polling. Maybe you don't think about it at all, or maybe only reflect on them when there are news stories saying which party is currently outperforming the other. But who is even polled? How many issues do they represent? And can we trust that they're even accurate? We'll find that out after we look into what's been happening while you were sleeping. It's Wednesday, August 12. One of Australia's largest independent service stations has been raided by federal police in a crackdown on illegal tobacco. The coordinated raids on Metro Petroleum service stations took place yesterday at more than 100 locations across New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, South Australia, WA and the ACT. There is pressure on the Albanese government to reduce the tax on tobacco in a bid to kill off the black market, with ABS data showing an estimated 80% of all tobacco consumed in 2025 was illicit, up from 12% in 2017. Falling house prices and lower than expected inflation data has helped convince the Reserve Bank to leave the cash rate untouched at 4.35% for the second straight meeting. In its accompanying statement, the board said following 3 interest rate rises since the beginning of 2026, financial conditions had tightened and the economy appeared to be slowing as expected. But Governor Michelle Bullock reined in market expectations that the RBA might have declared its hiking cycle was over, with both headline and underlying inflation remaining substantially above the bank's 2 to 3% target range. New forecasts released by the RBA also showed inflation is expected to remain above 2.5% until early 2028. Labor has shut down efforts to lift a ban on telehealth consultations for voluntary assisted dying patients. Under current laws, doctors are prevented from providing euthanasia services over the phone or via telehealth, facing penalties of over $300,000 if they use a telephone, video conference or email to discuss voluntary assisted dying options. Independent MP Kate Chaney yesterday introduced a motion in the lower house to amend the criminal code to remove the penalties on doctors, which was quickly defeated. This means those who live in regional and rural areas will have to travel to in-person doctor visits. Ms Chaney saying some will have to do so while in distress or in pain, and that some may die before they can access the end-of-life care they want. Ministers, including Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, have raised concerns that it could lead to misuse of the telehealth system. An ex-girlfriend of one of the complainants in the Alan Jones indecent assault trial has told the court she can remember her then-boyfriend's face when he returned from a sleepover with the former radio broadcaster, even 20 years later. She says complainant Jay looked like he'd seen a ghost, keeping his head down, his eyes averted, and seeming uncomfortable. She says he would tell her that Jones had touched him inappropriately, saying she asked if he wanted to report it but was told firmly no, and that he asked her not to tell anyone. Jones has pleaded not guilty to all 22 charges of sexual touching without consent and indecent assault, stemming from accusations from 6 men between 2003 and 2020. Aussies across the country filled out their census forms last night, with the website holding up this time and no repeat of the infamous 2016 crash. The Australian Bureau of Statistics says that while many Australians would wait until the end of the day to fill out their forms, more than 5 million of us had already completed it by 10 a.m. yesterday, accounting for more than half of the 2021 total households counted. The census is compulsory, but you do have a few days leeway to get it done. If you don't, you'll be contacted to complete it, and if you hold off, it could lead to fines in excess of $300 a day. The number of people who've now died in the Democratic Republic of Congo's second largest Ebola outbreak in history has now surpassed 2,000. Government data shows the outbreak has recorded a total of 4,381 confirmed cases, including 2,011 deaths, with 704 patients remaining in isolation. It took around 9 weeks for the outbreak to record the first 1,000 deaths, but it's taken just 3 weeks for that figure to double, showing the outbreak is moving faster than efforts to track and manage it. This outbreak has been caused by the rare Bundibugyo virus, which has no approved vaccines or treatments, research indicating it stemmed from a new transmission from animals to humans rather than from variants linked to earlier outbreaks. A UK radio station has been found to have breached broadcasting standards after accidentally airing a package they'd created for the day King Charles dies. Many media outlets pre-make obituaries for public figures in preparation for their death. And while Radio Caroline was streaming from a remote location, a staffer who was performing maintenance on a studio computer found the files and played them out of curiosity. The 3 files played include confirmation of the King's death, the national anthem, and then 16 minutes of silence. The host of the Barry Marr show eventually realised what had happened and apologised, confirming the King was not dead. Those are today's top stories. On the way next, Kylie has a question about polling, and we're getting to the bottom of it. It seems every week these days there's a new political poll result. This week, it was a news poll showing Federal Labor and One Nation dropped a point to be even on 29%, while the Coalition, so the Liberals and the Nationals, dropped 1% back to 18%. A Roy Morgan poll earlier this month had support for the ALP unchanged on 27.5%, One Nation down 1.5 to 24%, and the Coalition up 1.5 to 23.5%. Now, the idea of polling is that a sample size of Australians are asked how they intend to vote, which is why you might hear the phrase, if an election was held now, so-and-so party would win. They'll ask people across the country for federal polls or bring it back to state and territory basis if they're looking at local elections. Most polls are paid for by media companies. The one you might hear about most commonly is the news poll for The Australian. But the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age and the Financial Review also do them too. They'll commission a polling company like Newspoll or Roy Morgan, Ipsos, YouGov and the like to do the poll for them. There are also academic polls commissioned by university and researchers, and some that may come from advocacy groups like think tanks or organisations like Climate 200 or GetUp. And of course, political parties will pay for their own internal polling too. So what do we know about how they work and what they actually tell us? Daniel Casey is a lecturer in politics and international relations at the Australian Catholic University. Daniel, welcome to the Solo Bureau.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to read you the message that Kylie sent because she has some really valid questions about polling. She said, "Who is getting polled? I have never been. I don't know anyone who has. Is there a possibility that it is government-driven and certain parties put more time and effort into it as a scare tactic, i.e. marketing?" She says, "I'm Victorian. There's no way I believe the Libs are losing percentage-wise compared to One Nation and Labor. I feel like this is Labor-favoured info to try and push/influence people away from their potential preference. Very curious, as the poll, I don't feel, reflect true values that are really happening within the community." What do you say to a question like that? Is there government influence behind opinion polls?
Well, that is a really interesting and valid question. To answer it, we sort of have to go back almost 70 years of statistical history, which I promise I won't go into a lot of depth. But the most famous example was the old Reader's Digest used to run polls of their readers asking who they were going to vote for in the upcoming presidential elections. They got that massively wrong. But as statistical research advanced, we realized that provided you are genuinely randomly asking people, and that's the big caveat here, genuinely randomly choosing people, you could get a pretty accurate representation if you simply asked 1,200, 1,300 people across the country. And so for most of the probably 1970s through to the 1990s, what pollsters would do is randomly call a home phone number on the assumption that that randomly calling home phone numbers was pretty close to genuinely randomly asking people. And through that method, we would get a relatively accurate sample. And statistically, we know that if you ask about 1,000 people genuinely randomly, the error is going to be maybe between 2 to 3%. So if the polls say it's, say, 48-52, we can say with relative confidence that it's somewhere between 46, so 48 minus 2, up to about 50. Now, the problem is, I'm sure Kylie, like most of your listeners, no longer has a home phone number. And so nowadays, the biggest problem here is, are the people that the pollsters are asking genuinely a random reflection of the public? And if you look at Newspoll, which is one of the most high profile polling brands in Australia, they now use an online sample of Australians who are paid to do a whole series of online polls. Now, maybe when you've bought a ticket to a show on Ticketmaster or Ticketek, after that, this little pop-up comes up saying you've been selected to answer some questions. And so that's the sort of place where Newspoll and others then get their respondents. And Newspoll actually puts out in detail how many people they've asked. So the most recent Newspoll, they sampled 1,242 people across Australia. And they knew that wasn't random. So they then weighted that by age, by gender, by location, by region, by income, by housing tenure, to try and roughly equate their sample to the population. So if the population is 51% female, they'll make sure that their sample is 51% female. If the population is majority only with a high school qualification, they'll make sure that that matches also. So what does that mean for Kylie? Well, yeah, the chances of being actually chosen are very small. If there's only 1,200 people being asked, the chances of you being chosen, Kylie, are very small. But hopefully the people that Newspoll are choosing are pretty close to a genuinely random reflection of the population as a whole.
So when we're talking about weighting a poll, it could mean that, say, within those 1,000 people, they only managed to find one 18-year-old man. And so then that one 18-year-old man's opinion on who he is currently supporting between these political parties now has to represent however many 18-year-old men there are in Australia. So that doesn't feel very accurate to me.
Statistically, yes, you're right. I have confidence that the pollsters would make sure that that hadn't happened. But statistically, yes, that's exactly what weighting would do. Now, I haven't read the full methodology statement, but that sort of information is probably available. But the better quality polling organizations go to a lot of effort to make sure that the 1,200 people they get are as close to representative as possible. But 18-year-old men are probably some of the hardest people to actually reach. Yes. Now, does that mean that it's biased? The groups like Newspoll and others stake their reputation on doing the best statistical job they can. They are not pushing an agenda. Now, that's not to say, in fact, I'm absolutely confident that the Labor Party, the Liberal Party, and others leak internal polling to push their own agenda. So that happens without a doubt. And that's why it's so important that when you read a news story about polling, you look at who did the poll, when was the polling done, who paid for the poll. And in fact, the Australian Press Council puts out standards that say media organisations must report who paid for the poll, how many people in the sample, and all those sort of things, so that you can differentiate between a news poll and an internal ALP poll that has been deliberately leaked to push a particular agenda.
What about, Daniel, when we do have those standards? So say, for example, you might hear all the time a news poll done for The Australian. So it talks about the Australian newspaper. Does the Australian newspaper's political leanings impact those survey results at all?
I am confident that they do not. The Australian pays a professional polling company called Pixis, who are part of the Australian Polling Council standards. Pixis releases their entire methodology statement, all of the questions that they ask, how those questions are asked, so that other pollsters, other academics can go through those questions and make sure that they're not unfair, leading, biased, etc. Now, that's not the same as saying the way those poll is reported doesn't push a particular agenda, and that's on each individual journalist and each individual editor to decide when Anthony Albanese goes up by 1 or 2 points or goes down by 1 or 2 points. Is the headline Albanese slumps or Albanese victory party or no real change here? That may absolutely reflect the political leanings of the journalist, the editor, or the newspaper, but the underlying numbers don't.
Why do we have so many of them now, Daniel? It feels like there is a new poll every second day. Is that just me because I live in the news cycle and see them more regularly? Or am I not imagining it? Are there more polls than ever?
Look, it depends what you compare it to, but yes, there are a lot more polls at the moment. So the best way that I could track it through a very respected serfologist, there's a new word for you. A serfologist is a person who studies elections. He's counting that there were 12 polls released just last month. That's roughly 3 every week. I think we've had 140 polls from 10 different pollsters since the 2025 election, which is roughly 2 every week. Now, if you go back to the 1990s, I think there were probably only 40 odd polls per year, so fewer than 1 each week. So, yes, it's most certainly gone up. Why? It makes good news, is one factor. One of the peaks in the number of polls we had was during that period where Australia was the coup capital of the world, with Gillard knocking over Rudd, Rudd knocking over Gillard, the Turnbull, Abbott, Morrison years. I would suggest that the constant barrage of polls contributed to that instability. But as you yourself know from your career, newsrooms are shrinking. There is a pressure on newsrooms, on journalists to constantly churn out content. And so a pre-packaged opinion poll is an easy thing to turn to rather than doing the long form investigative journalism. And opinion polls now are also much cheaper to run. Remember, I talked about calling random phone numbers. That was done by real people who sat there on phones speaking to other real people. That was expensive. These days, it's all done online, which means the cost of running an opinion poll has come down significantly.
Is polling a relatively easy way to control public discourse? So, for example, at the moment, the conversation that pretty much every one of these recent polls has started is the rise of One Nation, and then eventually discussion will happen around leader Pauline Hanson. And then does that then in turn create more support for One Nation? Like, is it a self-fulfilling prophecy, these kinds of things? Is polling, say, as you mentioned, it could have influenced Gillard to overthrow Rudd, to overthrow Gillard, and then all the, Liberal changes of leadership. Could the polling have influenced those things in the way that it's easier for Australians to listen to the opinion of 1,000 odd people than it is to actually delve into the issues that these parties actually stand for?
That is certainly part of the problem. Delving into issues is hard, is complex. Running an opinion poll, talking horse races is much easier. What impact does it have on people? It's really hard to pull apart, but there is certainly evidence of a bandwagon effect, particularly for newer or smaller parties, where a voter might think, well, there's no point me supporting a small party, be it the Greens, the Democrats, One Nation, party, which existed here in the ACT, because they're not a genuine competitor. My vote's going to be wasted. They're never going to win. So why should I bother supporting them? When parties start to get critical mass, that then leads to A, more media coverage, but B, for the public to go, oh, maybe One Nation is a realistic contender. Maybe they could win. Therefore, I want to be on the winning side. I'm happy to support them. I'm willing to support them. And so there are definitely some people who vote for the party that they think is going to win. Yes.
So basically, when we're looking at reporting of news polls, we have to take a few things into account. The sample size, who paid for it, the political leanings of the media company who was reporting on it, and then the discourse that follows that, and the fact that that might be influencing more people to follow certain paths. So should we stop talking about polling?
It's not the sample size that matters, because 1,200 people is a very good sample size. What matters is the margin of error and therefore how it's being reported. So the latest news poll has a margin of error of 3.1%. So therefore, a move of 1 or 2% is statistically meaningless. We're saying any move of less than 3% is effectively a statistical dead heat. So that's what matters and ties back into how the journalists are reporting on it. Are they reporting a 2% move as a massive drop for Albanese, when in fact, statistically, a 2% move is absolutely nothing? Should we stop talking about polls? Well, in a democracy, understanding public opinion matters. But maybe we need to move on from just talking about 51-42 to opinion polls that go into more depth, that talk about issues, that talk about what people care about, and also exploring other forms of public opinion. John Howard had a reputation for being deeply engaged with public opinion, and he thought that talkback radio was one of the best forms of listening to public opinion. Letters to the editor, letters from constituents to MPs is another part of public opinion that matters, because their MPs can read in depth the type of issues that people are concerned about, how much they care about them, what that means for them. So as one colleague of mine has said, there are never too many polls. There's simply good use of polling and bad uses of polling.
Daniel, thank you so much for giving us your insights on this. We have a lot to think about. We really appreciate you giving us some of your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question, Kylie. It's not a straightforward answer, but from what we learned today, the results showing the Liberal National Coalition struggling in recent polls is an accurate reflection of how Australians view the party right now. Will it be the same in 12 months' time? That remains to be seen. But we'll find out in Victoria in November, when Victorians actually go to the polls. Thanks for spending your day with the Solo Bureau team. Hope you have a great day. We'll catch you back here tomorrow. Bye.